In this module, we'll be talking about Moresby for students who speak English as a second language. We'll be covering the principles of quality career education as a starting point for reflecting. We'll discuss our definition of diversity, who our culturally and linguistically diverse people are in Victoria, the importance of relative strengths and the personality elements of the profile, and also demonstrate a range of EAL profiles taken from Moresby Online. We'd like to start here because there's a large portion of our Year 9 students who are actually from a background where they speak English as another language at home. We really intend on this project making a significant difference in the lives of students who ordinarily wouldn't get access to this type of support. So for us, the right questions about interests, values, talents, and strengths are really, really important. We need for these students to be given time to develop their self-awareness and to understand that they can have meaning and purpose. High-quality career education celebrates diversity and uniqueness, explores potential challenges and barriers, and it brings the family along the journey, not presenting things in only one way. It's person-centred, it's strengths-based, and it offers hope. We think for our English as another language students that this is particularly important, and particularly important in actually including their families who are very deeply invested in the opportunity provided to their children. And why hope? We wanted to touch on hope in this section because we'll be covering a number of other diverse groups, starting with the diverse, culturally and linguistically diverse population, and moving through to other diversity groups. So research shows there's a strong link between hope and student engagement, which has a flow-on effect of greater career clarity. For Year 9s, that's an incredibly important opportunity. Hope is based around strengths, interests, personality, and the ability for self-reflection. It's a critical lens through which to view all people who receive careers counselling and not just diverse groups of people. Hope recognises that people have personal assets, some of these will be cultural, and that there is often interconnectedness between what these will all impact and on how they see themselves and their value. So what do we mean by diversity? Diversity is all of the differences between people in how they identify in relation to their age, caring responsibilities, cultural background, whether or not they have a disability, their gender or gender identity, whether they're Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, their sexual orientation, their intersex status, and socioeconomic background. This is actually an intersectional moment here where we can understand that some people have one of these or multiple of these. Diversity is also inclusive of professional, educational, work experiences, and your organisational role, a professional identity. Taken together, these aspects form our individual identity and perspective of the world. Inclusion occurs when a diversity of people feel valued and respected and have access to opportunities and resources and can contribute their perspectives and talents to improve their organisation or their community. We think the Moresby assessment will be a significant contributor to helping people from diverse backgrounds make amazing career choices and bring their unique perspectives and talents to the fore. Pennell and Amundsen posit that active engagement encourages critical examinations of assumptions, conventions, and traditions associated with life and career counselling. Having assumptions isn't the problem, it's not recognising that you do that matters. Before you engage as a careers consultant for the Year 9 project, have a quick think about what are your assumptions for each of these groups. Kicking off with culturally and linguistically diverse people, I'd like to talk about how we can look at their profiles from a person-first, strengths-based approach, unpacking some of the assumptions, but also unpacking some of the cultural strengths that comes from having a diverse background. And for context, we actually wanted to set out for you the latest census data that tells us nearly half of Australians were either born overseas, first generation, or are from or have one or both parents that have been born overseas, i.e. second generation. you can see that there's a third generation plus, which for us means that there is a very, very large portion of the Australian population that is culturally and linguistically diverse. How does this translate into Victorian government schools? Well, a third of the students we'll be seeing as part of the Year 9 project identify as speaking English as a second language. This is why it's important to highlight relative strengths. Given that every student will have a unique profile and may have differing levels of language abilities, we think it's really important for each one-on-one interview to not focus necessarily on how high a person scores, but to really celebrate the shape of the profile and what this means for the future career pathway. You can see in this example that the student performed relatively well. Here you can see the spatial and mechanical are relatively lower. It's about the shape of the profile and bringing their career passions and personalities to the fore when we're considering this. You can see here this person's ended up with the facilitator, which means that they're quite sociable, they're happy to lead and to set targets and goals for themselves and for others. Extroversion means that there's a capacity for them to work with others. If you head down to the judging perceiving section, you can see they have a very strong preference for judging, which means that that person needs a really structured workplace. In reflecting on the diversity, it's really important for us to think about the normal. So Moresby UK, in starting this project, is incredibly unique. It's the first time psychometric testing has been done on students of this age. So they've now been benchmarked as the first cohort of students, and they've created a data set that reflects the Victorian public school system. The data was adjusted once it was over 2,000 and will continue to be tweaked as more students have been assessed. But statistically speaking, they've now got a really great benchmark based on Year 9 students from Victorian government schools. This makes sure that relative strengths are more accurately measured against peers of the same age across the public school system. So the department currently has over 12,000 students who speak English as another language. There are 12 language groups that account for the majority of these students and their families. So you're thinking Chinese, Arabic, and a number of other languages here. We're working with the department to make sure that these languages are translated into the main documents for families so that they can ensure they're able to make the most out of the Careers Advisory Service. And soon you'll be able to actually phone for a translation service, which means that if you've got a student who requires support, that you'll be able to dial in support for them and have that interview translated. We've endeavoured to make sure that school support staff have been able to actually experience the Moresby profile for themselves, as we made you do, so that they can understand what types of questions the students can complete in the assessment and the kind of boundaries around pushing them along and supporting them to finish the profiler. Students from diverse backgrounds are also welcome to bring along their support people if they've got translation services that they are comfortable with or other integration aids. They're actually welcome to bring those people along, or if their parents need translation support, they too are welcome to access that translation service. This recognises the very strong part that parents play in shaping career conversations. We'd just really like to run through a couple of EAL profiles just to show you that in line with first generation, second generation and third generation culturally and linguistically diverse communities, not all EAL students are the same. So you can see in this profile taken this year that this individual had an incredibly high verbal, really interested in sport and a really strong interest in technology. For a student that has performed this well, Moresby itself would take that profile holistically and has not in this case made any adjustments. For this one, again, a really high verbal and mechanical score, highly structured work environment, likes to persuade and advise. So even though it says up here that if you have a look in the top right that some of the results were ignored, in fact this profile has not been adjusted, and as part of the broader project, Moresby is actually fixing up what those aptitude summaries say to students. So now they'll actually receive a thing that says, you've identified yourself as speaking a language other than English at home. You've performed really well, so we haven't bothered to make any adjustments. In some cases, though, you'll see that in this case, there were some issues in terms of verbal, and it's noted as an EAL profile. In this case, Moresby would suppress some of the course suggestions. So in some cases, it will be really important for that student to complete a vocabulary test. In your interview notes, you can say to them, over time, as your English skills improve, you might like to sit that vocabulary test, and that will unlock a number of other areas that you're interested in. If the student's pretty confident that they're not really going to need that and they're interested in areas that aren't going to rely on their verbal skills, then they might consider just following the career path as is. But you can see it's incredibly interesting that an EAL profile can have very high verbal and back to quite fair. In this profile, the person was identified as EAL. In this case, the student did not perform incredibly well. It was an ipsitized result, which means that the results were adjusted across the board. That possibly reflects the fact that they are from an non-English speaking background. In this case, we would ask the person to potentially do the vocabulary test and to work on their literacy skills in terms of considering some of their career results. So just to recap about where the vocabulary test part what it looks like. If it does actually identify English as another language as an impediment to the overall profile creation, the tool makes that automatically adjusts the profile, the career recommendations in the report to reflect that. Depending on the student interests and their goals, they can unlock further recommendations by completing the vocabulary test. The vocabulary test is about 5 minutes long and can be done after the one-on-one interview. So that's what we're recommending as a suggested activity. If you come across a student who looks like their profile is similar to one of the adjusted results that we've just showed you, you can pop that into the interview. That information will go to the careers advisor, who can create work and learning plans that actually address some of those literacy, numeracy and language issues. So for next steps, we'd ask you just to quickly have a bit of a reflection on the assumptions you've made about the number of kids in schools who speak English as another language at home, and reflect on some of the assumptions you've made about the students now that you've seen a few EAL profiles. We'd ask in your counselling practice as you start in the field to look at the Moresby profiles you see, which type of EAL students you're working with, and reflect on how you might incorporate those notes referring to the vocab test, and additional notes for working on language skills to open up career options. In terms of the next module, we'd ask you to have a look at the module that relates to students with a disability.